Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Welcome back to Resiliency Redefined. So today, the big idea that we are going to dive into is a bit of a repeat based on popular demand. It's the idea around emotion. Folks were really curious about an earlier episode I had done on emotion and said, say more. So here I am to say more about emotion, and I am so glad that you are here for this. So I appreciate there's lots of conversation about emotion. And sometimes I have this I perceive emotion to be perceived in the world as this secondary piece to logic, right? We are in this developed type of a world system where logic seems to take precedence, yet emotion is right up there with being such an important part of our humanity. Emotion is what brings the color, the richness, all of the different, mosaics of experiences are painted and they're dazzled with emotion. Now, again, there's lots of information on emotion. And I think probably one of the best ways to, for example, introduce emotion to children is in the amazing work by Pixar on the Inside Out movies. Those are phenomenal resources to start the conversation with kids about emotion. And I just want to shout out to Dr. Lisa Damour, who is a remarkable voice in psychology, especially for teenagers, and her work in that film to really give us a great picture of what emotion looks like. Now, when I'm working with people, and whether it's in a community practice or a large group, we focus on predominantly four primary emotions. And we talk about glad, sad, mad, and afraid. One of the things that I have noticed working with people around emotion is because we're these feeling factories, and there's so many variations on a theme of all of the different frequencies and emotion and feelings. Where do you even begin? So where I like to begin for clarity and just real candor as what is it that we're talking about is focusing on those four primary. So I'll say them again. So it's glad, sad, mad, and afraid. Yes, there's other theories that talk about disgust, and that's universal. Other ones talk about arousal, which again, really biological and physiological. But for the purposes of our work here, I encourage us to think about the primary four. So again, it's glad, sad, mad, and afraid. Now, you might notice that the ratio of the human emotion factory, it's kind of leaning towards what we would perceive as heavier emotions, or what some would call negative emotion. Now, I don't like using negative and positive emotion because it suggests that it's a moral issue. And it's not a moral issue. Feelings aren't bad. They aren't innately evil or mean-spirited. They're serving a purpose. So when we talk about this idea as a negative emotion, what we usually refer to as it's lower in its frequency, and it's heavier and it's more dense. It's in that kind of negative heaviness versus glad is something that feels enlightened. It's merriment. It's that lighter type of emotion that moves us more in a positive direction. So our first big idea that we're going to shelve is this notion that there's good and bad feelings. Feelings serve a purpose. They're giving us information. So I think it's not by chance or happenstance that our ratio of 1 to 4 in terms of what we could call more pleasant emotions versus the negative ones or the heavier ones, the ones most of us don't like as much, I don't think that's by chance. I think it has a lot to do with our evolution and the fact that the negative emotion keeps us alive. It signals danger. It lets us know about injustice. It creates this sense of, just being on edge to be able to notice threat, to be able to be afraid, and also to be able to be mad when things aren't okay, right? We get these big, for example, hunger pains, and we're like, oh, I want to feel differently. I'm mad that I feel this way because I'm hungry. I'm going to then be propelled into action. So, one of the drivers of emotion is to move us into action. Okay, so here's a question. Take a moment just reflect back on when you were growing up, what emotions were you encouraged to feel or even celebrated for? Just take a moment. Like, what emotions was it like your home system really were like okay with you having? Now, take a moment and think about what emotions were you not encouraged to express or maybe even shamed for having. I know a lot of women I speak to, a lot of women talk about the fact that they were not allowed to be angry. They were not allowed to be angry or mad yet. Yet that emotion is so important. As I said in our last episode, anger, I believe, is one of the parts that like love us the most because it's trying to protect us. It is willing to push against the group or what's going on in the kind of the spirit of wanting to keep us like safe and us being respected and protected and looked after. So our anger, it is not a bad thing. It's this shield. But so often behind the anger, we often see sadness. Usually, anger is the shield that's protecting sadness. And that's why I think anger is so important because it's protecting our vulnerable parts, the part that feels perhaps sad or maybe even afraid. So, for example, have you ever noticed like somebody like does like a startle or a jump out or a pop up? I don't know if that makes sense. It's like you're walking around the corner and somebody kind of jumps out at you and you get scared. Do you notice after you have that initial scared reaction that you get mad at them? There was like this little video I remember going around on social media where this like woman who happened to be holding a hammer and she was like putting on it like using like a tiny little pitcher nail and she was hanging this little pitcher and her partner or her husband or whoever came around the corner and like startled her and she like hit the hammer, but thankfully she actually hit the wall, but the wall had a mirror on it and like she shattered the mirror and it was like holy lifting. But again, notice after you get startled or scared, you get maybe angry or maybe startled and scared, and then you get super sad. So emotion are working in tandem. Okay. All right. So circling back to the question I asked you to reflect upon, what emotions were you allowed to feel when you were younger and which ones maybe weren't as encouraged? Maybe, for example, and one I hear often, especially when I'm working with a particular group of teenagers, is this idea that they're like not allowed to be sad, right? Interesting, right? Where they're not allowed to be sad because when they feel sadness, what is said to them is, what do you have to be sad about? Like, look at all your privilege, look at all these opportunities. Just again, this idea that, if we are grateful, that somehow means that we can't be sad, even though we know in this feeling factory, again, it's this mosaic of all of these different variations and assortments of emotion. Okay, so let's say in that little trip on memory lane, you notice, okay, well, I wasn't really encouraged to feel, sadness or anger, or wow, I noticed I wasn't allowed to feel mad. Okay. Well, nobody really said much about me being scared other than don't be a scaredy cat, right? Or perhaps maybe that is true for you. All right. So glad, right? Were you allowed to feel glad, happiness, joy, merriment, like all of those iterations of it? Now, interestingly, when I talk to some folks, there are actually folks who tell me that growing up, they were told, like, don't get too happy, right? Don't be too happy. Don't, it's not going to last forever, right? Don't get your hopes up. So it's amazing how we have all of these narratives and these old stories about emotion. And there's like this whole like plot and like a subplot and like a subplot to it, in the sense that maybe sometimes we are allowed to feel it in certain places, but not in other places, around certain people and certain situations. Oh my goodness. No wonder we are this like half the time, like just marinating in this emotional sauce of I have no idea what I'm feeling, because we've lost touch with not only what we're feeling, but what we're allowed to feel or ought to feel. Another example I can share with you on this kind of notion, and this ties into that last one about, what do you have to be sad about, is the notion of, we talk about privilege. And again, privilege is, it's connecting to these pieces of like the opposite of afraid, like our needs are met so we don't have to feel fear. And I hear people say, if you have a roof over your head and you have a job and you have food, then you should be grateful, right? Because, think of all the people who don't have those basic necessities. And my gentle invitation to hold space around you, if you notice, yes, I have those things, a roof over my head, I have food I'm able to provide, but perhaps you're still struggling. It doesn't matter if you're drowning in 2 feet of water or 10 feet of water, you're still underwater. And what I mean by that is we have emotional experiences. And just because somebody has it worse off than we do, that doesn't like negate the feeling that we are feeling. That doesn't like wipe away the fact that, something is hard or difficult or it's a different season or something is amiss. The other piece that we know too is that when we look at, for example, the practice of empathy, when we look at empathy and when we see that people lose their capacity to hold empathy and compassion for other people, it's because often they've stopped sharing it with themselves. Okay, let me say that again. People lose the capacity to hold empathy because they're not sharing it with themselves. And something that we know about empathy, it needs to flow through us. And when we practice empathy with ourselves and compassion with ourselves, we have more of it to give to others. So, in that attempt to like save empathy and compassion for the people who really need it, it actually is the opposite. When we show ourselves more compassion and empathy, it allows us to have this amazing, scope creep, and we give it to other people so much more freely. So I'll give you a quick example that I just had recently about showing myself some empathy and compassion. I was filling out this form. And again, those tasks of filling out these forms, and, I was trying to do an editable PDF, and it was just a tricky task I was trying to do off the side of my desk. So I wasn't giving the task the attention it actually needed. And I got to one point and I had to enter a very old address, right? So I had to do this like an address of where where the children were born, the kind of where have you been for the last 20 years or whatever. So I'm filling out these addresses. And then it was telling me that one address was incorrect. And I got so cheesed. Like my first reaction was anger, and I wanted to like push the keyboard away like that. And that's what's amazing about anger. When we feel it, it drives us to either push away or push through. Right. That's why we feel it in our bodies. It's like motivating us to push. So I wanted to like shove the keyboard away because I was frustrated. And I kept on going over and over this piece of information where I'm like, I know this was the address. I'm 100% confident in my mind's eye. I remember even remembering the door that had the address number on it. I'm like, I know this is right. And I tell you, I was if you would have like put me in like a lie detector test, I would have passed because I believed in my bones this address was correct. Anyway, so I realized I was like spinning my tires. So I just pushed the keyboard away. I stood up, and in the spirit of Dr. James Rouse, I did 10 full body weight squats just in my office. I drank some water. I just moved my body around and I sat down to try again. And then all of a sudden, I like literally was laughing so hard. I had like tears streaming down my face because the address that I was so convinced was my address was 221 Baker Street. Now, I have never lived at a 221 Baker Street. I did live at another Baker Street. I did live on Baker Street, but it was a different number. And this was years and years ago. But I was so convinced. I lived at 221 Baker Street. And why I started to laugh in that moment, because I remembered who actually lives at 221 Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. Sherlock Holmes. I was imagining the door of Sherlock Holmes, 221B, as a matter of fact. But it was so amazing is that when I was in that distress state, so remember, that's that stress bucket overfilling. It's that feeling of like, I'm sure I know this to be true. I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. Okay, that is when I tell you we are cognitively impaired. Okay, this is when we miss things. This is when we drop the ball. But as soon as we step back and we re regulate and we get back into that zone, we feel the feeling, but then we get back into that zone, all of a sudden we have the gift of clarity. And in that moment, I could have gotten mad at myself for being so stupid. I couldn't even imagine what I would have used to say to myself if I would have made that mistake versus just realizing, wow, I have a great example of how confident we are, even when we are wrong, when we are in a place of distress. So, all that to say, when we are feeling big emotions and they are paired with us being in a place of distress, which again, our stress buckets are overflowing, we're just not feeling 100%, holding that compassionate recognition that, again, we're cognitively impaired. Like the part of our brain that needs to make really good decisions, that makes, that entertains logic, that can process, that isn't the part of our brain that's being activated. That part isn't getting the oxygen rich blood. The other parts are that survival, that I will fight this part of our brain is being activated. Okay. So when you are in that heightened state and you have a big emotion, my invitation for you here, just get to the shore. You do not have to problem solve it. You do not have to fix it. You do not have to prevent it. You don't have to do anything other than just get yourself to the shore. You're in water. You just have to get yourself to the shore, whatever that looks like. So, me in that moment, pausing and like getting out of my head and just doing some squats, moving my body around, drinking some water, that was me getting to the shore. I wasn't trying to fix it. I wasn't like spending all this time, again, spinning my tires more than I needed to be, right? I was until I caught the emotion and realized that this was not working. Get to the shore. And so often people will tell me when they're in the thick of it, they're like, I need to find a way to not get myself into these situations. I need to find a way to do better. I need to level up, skill up, learn, unlearn. It's like, no, please hear my words. Just get to the shore. When you're on the shore, which is that state of regulation, safety, security, stability, and solidness, and all of those brain parts are working in our favor, then we can start to problem solve. Then we can reflect. Then we can level up, skill up, learn. In the messy middle of in those big emotions that are activating distress, please just get to the shore. Which brings me to this notion about the idea. I don't know whoever said we're not supposed to go to bed angry. Or, you have to like make sure like, to clear everything out before you try to go to bed, especially in relationships. If you are both stuck in the mud and you are in the rapids, the currents, whatever example that you want to do, where you are literally trying to survive because your nervous system is activated and you are hot, those emotions are hot, nothing good will come of it. We will say things we do not mean. We will push and push. We will make terrible choices because right then and there, we just have to get to the shore, which is a place of feeling safe and secure. So maybe even being able to say to your partner or to your kid, hey, I got nothing left for this. I love the heck out of you. I'm not giving up on this relationship, but I'm calling a timeout. And maybe that means then you go to bed, right? Then you walk away. And what's amazing is that fear response of needing everything to be okay. It's going to like want to like trap people in these situations where we're essentially pulling each other down. It's the same way when they tell people like, we only want trained people to rescue people when they're drowning because the person you're rescuing can inadvertently pull you under if you don't know what you are doing. So having emotional like intelligence in the sense of understanding that when you have these big hot emotions, you might not be in that optimal place to problem solve, to think, to be that person you want to be and you're aspiring to be. Learning how to ride the emotion, right? Ride the wave if you need to. Just focus on getting to shore. And I truly believe that's like part of it. Now, in the spirit of landing this podcast and bringing it to a close, I do want to just share one quick little anecdote, which I shared on stage for the first time a couple weeks ago. And it was funny because afterwards, it was in a workshop. It was a very informal workshop. But afterwards, so many people like told me that that was like their little highlight. So I wanted to bring it to you here today. I remember getting into a little bit, I was pretty cheesed with, we'll just call them one of the teenagers. Okay, I'll give them the privacy of one of the teenagers who happened to be a boy. So it's 2 out of 3, you can guess. Anyway, so I was having like butting heads with one of my teenagers. And finally, in a moment when I realized that literally we were both swirling in this whirlpool and someone had to get to the shore, I turned to him and I said, "You're not going to win this. You know that." And he was like so in a big feeling. And I said, "You are not going to win this. I will win this. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am not a mother of a loser. So you need to stop." I actually said that, not my proudest moment. I literally said, only one of us can win. And I am not a mother of a loser. So you have to figure a way to just stop right now because you're making it worse. My invitation for you is probably not to say that without a lot of like relationship repair and to like understand. But there is something so remarkable about just that big, old fashioned like interrupt, right? Like just, oh my goodness, when we are swirling and we are going in those like echo chambers, sometimes you just got to pull that chute. And you know, when you watch somebody who is actually skydiving and they like pull the chute, they have that immediate like pullback. Sometimes we need the whistle, right? Sometimes you need the whistle, you need the stop because this isn't going in the direction I wanted to go. And the beautiful thing about relationships is us having that commitment to do the relationship repair. Now, what I love the most is I can share that story with my teenager after, and we both can laugh. Like, I mean, like a good belly laugh. Because he said, "Mom, that was a TSN moment for me." So learning happens, growth happens, but understanding that we don't always have to figure everything out right at the moment. Sometimes all we do need to do is get to shore. My friends, I hope that was helpful. There was a takeaway in there for you or two. Please keep asking me your questions. I love hearing from you. And ultimately, I just want to be useful for you. So anything that is top of mind for you, I'm sure other people are curious about it as well. So please reach out. I'm here to help. I hope you have a great day. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.